Hey guys, I decided to make this video because the reality of most wedding photography is that it does not take place in immaculate venues, in beautiful forests, or anything like that. They take place in pretty modest venues most of the time. And during COVID, a lot of weddings are going to be taking place in backyards. And shooting in a backyard is going to be very different than shooting in a forest with perfect lighting. There's a lot of things you have to consider, and there are different expectations you should have for how the photography is going to look. Now, early on as a photographer, it's easy to beat yourself up with the results not being what you expect. And that is partly because of Instagram, and you're looking at other photographers and they have, $100,000 weddings that they're shooting, and they're not shooting these backyard weddings, and their work looks incredible, and you think that's how your work should look. And it shouldn't. Your goal as a photographer is to have a mastery of the craft so that when you're at a venue, whatever that venue is, you can create the best results possible with those variables given to you. And so what I want to do today is talk about a job I shot last weekend, which was a wedding. If you guys follow my channel, you know I shoot events. I'm an event photographer, but I got my start in weddings, and I'm finding that there's actually an uptick in people getting backyard weddings. And oddly, they're reaching out to me. I say oddly because I actually removed all wedding photography from my website. But yeah, I shot weddings for years, and I think I shot like 1,000 weddings in total because I worked with the studio starting out where I was getting like 2-3 weddings a weekend plus my own work on the side. And so I shot a lot of them, and what I want to do is talk about how I went into shooting this wedding. First of all, this is a very unique situation because it was a 1-hour wedding. It's all they wanted to spend, it's all they could afford, and I did make some mistakes. I'm going to admit that right now. I'm too kind, and I think, hey, you know what, your wedding is no different than an event. I will give you my my event photography rate. And then I told them there is a 2-hour minimum, but they're like, we really only need 1 hour, and I caved, and I gave them the 1 hour and waived the second hour requirement. Now, I have some regrets about this. The experience was good, but I do have regrets because what I realized is there's a lot more editing involved in weddings, and because I haven't been shooting them as much, I kind of forgot about that. And the 1 hour of work turned into several hours of work probably, even though I'm a very quick editor. So I do have regrets on my pricing. So I'm going to restructure how I price weddings if, I just can't do my event photography rate anymore. And if I do, it has to be an exception, a special case. So anyway, when you're shooting a backyard wedding, you're going to have a lot of constraints. You might have time constraints, you might have space constraints. It really depends on how large the backyard is going to be. So the first thing to ask yourself is, what gear do you think you're going to need? I strongly recommend at least having one go-to zoom lens because you may get into a situation where you're not going to be able to even change your lenses. Things might be so tight, you might get stuck in a spot during the ceremony and have to make it work. Now, that didn't exactly happen to me, but it was a very limited situation. I found the lens I ended up using the most was it's on my 7D Mark II right now, is the lens I'm shooting with, which is a 24-70. This is my least favorite lens. It's just not an exciting lens to use, but it is such a versatile lens. You can get pretty wide, you can get somewhat zoomed in, you can do a lot with it. The second lens I used most at this event, however, I definitely couldn't rely on it, was a 135 millimeter lens. This is beautiful for shooting candid moments when you're able to move around freely, and for the most part, I did make it work. But once the ceremony began, I pretty much ended up married to that 24-70. Now, space was really, really tight. This is a very nice house. It was in a well-off area, but because it had a pool, it was limited for space. And I think there were like 20 to 30 guests in total, and so it was pretty packed in. And so if you're going to be shooting a wedding that's in a situation like this, it's going to be really beneficial if you know how to navigate crowds without making a lot of noise and without being very visible. At some point I was pressed, like wedged between a tree and a wall, that kind of thing. Probably the next biggest challenge you will face in a backyard wedding like this one would be shooting the formals. You're gonna have to work fast and work smartly to find good light, and forget good light, just the best light you can find. That's your job. The best light you find might not be perfect. However, if you're versatile and you're knowledgeable, you can make a lot of things work. So what I made work is I found an area in the yard in which I could backlight my subjects. My background was going to be a white wall with some greenery. It looked pretty good. But that's not it. A lot of people think backlighting is as simple as finding the light and putting the light behind someone, and that looks great. And it looks okay, but what happens is you get something like called dead eyes, or whatever you want to call it. It's when you have no catch light in the eyes. And what I found is a wall that was getting light from that light that was backlighting my subjects, and it was actually becoming a giant reflector. So being really good with light, understanding where you can find natural light modifiers can be really beneficial. And I'll show you guys, this is what they looked like, and I thought it looked very good. It wasn't the most creative, greatest photograph ever, but it is a competent, well done, formal portrait. And that's sometimes the most you can hope for. And trust me, no one will be upset about photos like these. The next thing to talk about is expectations for shot counts. Now, typically at an event, I'm probably closer to 100 to 200 photos an hour at most. But at this wedding, which was only 1 hour, I shot over 550-ish after I edited down. A lot more than I usually would shoot. And this was for two reasons. One, I had so much packed into 1 hour. I arrived, scouted, not much scouting to do when you're in a backyard, but scouted, started shooting candids, introduced myself, shot the ceremony, had to shoot formals, had to shoot a cocktail hour, had to shoot some dinner candids, etc., all in 1 hour. And so I don't have the luxury of being super conservative with my shot count. I have to really just shoot a little bit looser and faster because there's so much happening and less room for error, because I wasn't going to be there for 8 hours where I could really just get the best shots I possibly can. You have to manage those expectations as well. So those are my thoughts on shooting a small wedding. I hope it helps, because I'm guessing a lot of people are going to be shooting these small backyard weddings in the next few months. If you guys have questions for me or have any comments, please let me know. If you're new to the channel, like and subscribe. I appreciate it. For those of you that support me on Patreon, thank you so much. It keeps me going. I do this because I want to help people, but that really, it's a morale boost when I get a new subscriber. I'm not going to lie. Thank you guys. See you in the next video.